Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and I want to welcome our viewers from all over the world, including those of you watching us on the Portable TV app, which allows you to watch us at all times, no matter where you are, using your smartphone. So there is a gold rush of sorts in Africa. Did you know that the world has recently awakened to the enormous potential of a continent which in the past was always seen kind of like as an also-ran? So what that means is the economic future for Africa probably bodes pretty darn well. But I want to go back, if I can, for just a minute, to Africa's past instead. You see, by the early 1900s, most of Africa, it was colonized. Maybe the better word is owned by mainly 7 European powers, right? It was Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. And as you can see on this map, they literally divvied it up. They just divvied Africa up into parts and then forced the people in those areas to adapt to their languages and their cultures while they exploited Africa's resources. It was a successful exercise in control through administrative domination. Now, since then, many regions of Africa have kicked out those guys, those colonizers, and they've gained their independence. And they're now being courted by the United States instead, by Russia, Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia's nemesis, Iran, but most of all, by the Mac Daddy, China. China is expected to continue investing hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure in Africa. They're planning to build and announce roads, water treatment plants, communication systems, power plants, and a whole lot more. And you know, here's the thing about China. Here's the thing about China that is a differentiator, if you will. In Africa, it is not perceived as a threat. Why? Pretty simple if you think about it. It has no history there of exploitation or colonization. So why is that important? Why are we even talking about this on this day? Here's why. French President Emmanuel Macron has just come out and he's apologized to the nation of Rwanda for the harm that his country brought to the Rwandan people, including for France's role in the genocide that occurred in 1994 that resulted in the deaths of 250,000 people. But wait, today, this guy, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas, he went even further. He's announcing that Germany is not only acknowledging and apologizing for its role in the genocide that took place in Namibia in 1904, Germany is actually going to offer reparations for its colonial past with a commitment of more than $1 billion that's going to be paid out over the next 30 years. Imagine that. Imagine that. So here's the question. Are these former colonizers truly contrite? Do they really feel bad about what they did and that's it? Or are they just waking up to the economic reality of China's increasing role, if not dominion, of investments in Africa? Where else are you going to get this story? Nowhere but here on the News with Rick Sanchez, because we do believe it's time to do news again. So as you watch this newscast, we think you're going to have some questions that could possibly come to mind. For example, European countries are apologizing to African nations for colonization, but to what end? We're going to do a deep dive into that. Is it fair that Microsoft and Apple are not allowing repairmen to fix their products? More expensive for you, right? Also, more people worldwide are smoking. Really? Where? And why? All right, let's get right into this topic of Africa. China and the horrible history of European colonization, as we learned this week that both France and Germany are saying we are sorry for what we did, and may soon follow with a famous ex-lover's request, will you take me back to Africa? Here with more on this most fascinating story is correspondent Alex Mihailovich.
Approximately a century after the end of African colonization began to take place, some European nations have admitted their misdeeds. For example, in 2013, the United Kingdom apologized to Kenya and a list of other nations where it set up camp. And now, Germany has done the same with Namibia. In fact, it's gone a step further. Germany has admitted to taking part in a genocide in Namibia and has agreed to pay for its past.
And as a gesture of recognition of the incalculable suffering that was inflicted on the victims, we want to support Namibia and the descendants of the victims with a substantial program amounting to 1.1 billion euros, and this will focus in particular on rebuilding and development.
Germany admits nearly wiping out the Herero and Nama tribes during a rebellion against German colonial forces. It is estimated that 65,000 of 80,000 Herero perished between 1904 and 1908, while half of an estimated 20,000 Nama people died during the same period. In much more recent history, we saw a genocide in Rwanda, where in 1994 over 800,000 people were killed. This past week, during a visit to the nation, France's President Emmanuel Macron stopped short of apologizing but admitted that France bears some of the responsibility for the genocide.
France didn't understand that by wanting to interfere in a regional conflict or a civil war, it was de facto staying by the side of a genocidal regime. By ignoring the alerts from the more lucid observers, France was then bearing a devastating responsibility in a spiral that resulted in the worst, whereas it was trying precisely to avoid it.
Like with other European states, France has been trying to repair its relationship with some African nations. While the endeavors may seem noble, some say there's more to it. Africa remains resource-rich, and Europe still wants a piece of the pie. At the same time, China is a threat to European powers on the continent, as it takes a foothold in Africa. The country has been a key player in Africa's urbanization push, with a large percentage of infrastructure projects being driven by Chinese companies and/or backed by Chinese funding. Many say it's a part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which aims at strengthening political, economic, and strategic ties with countries in Africa and beyond. China has also been helping the continent with the COVID-19 crisis.
China actually has been providing vaccine aid to nearly 40 African nations through donations and sales at favorable prices.
Africa is one of the fastest growing regions in the world, and everyone wants a part of it. With little negative history on the continent, it's not out of reach for China to win hearts and minds. As for some Europeans, it is critical for them to make up for their colonial pasts if they want to be considered in Africa's future. For RT, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
Gerald Horne is a professor of history at the University of Houston. He writes, teaches, and thinks about this topic every day of his life. George Galloway is a former UKMP. So let's talk about this with these two gentlemen. Gerald, I think I have to start with you based on your knowledge of this topic. Would you say that what you're seeing is heartfelt by these European nations, or are they simply reading the writing on the wall and seeing that other countries are going into the place that they used to have dominion of?
It's certainly the latter. Keep in mind that it's not only China that France and the United States and Britain are worried about. It's also Turkey, which is playing an increasingly significant role in predominantly Muslim areas of Africa, including areas once colonized by France. I'm speaking of the region stretching from Mauritania on the west all the way across the continent through Mali, where France now has troops, through Niger, Chad, etc. Secondly, as your setup piece suggested, Africa is en route to becoming the factory floor of the world. It's not only the fact that China is investing in infrastructure, you also have Chinese entrepreneurs and state-owned corporations who see that wages are rising in China, and increasingly they're moving their enterprises into places like Ethiopia. Then I would say that there is a reparations movement. That is to say, descendants of the African slave trade, such as myself, headquartered in the United States, along with powerful bodies like the Caribbean community, that is to say Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, not to mention the African Union headquartered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, are pressing the United States and the North Atlantic powers for reparations. And I don't think you can understand what Heiko Maas, the German foreign minister, announced with regard to Namibia without understanding this pressure that is calling for reparations. However, with regard to Germany, it may be too little, too late, because many of the affected communities in Namibia, that is to say the Herero people and Nama people who were subjected to genocide, feel that Berlin has not spoken to what they consider to be the critical question, which is land. That is to say, even in 2021, a disproportionately overwhelming percentage of the land in Namibia, which is as large territorially as California and Texas combined, is controlled by descendants of German colonizers, not to mention latecomers from the Afrikaner community in South Africa. So this issue will continue to percolate, I'm afraid to say.
Wow, this sounds like a 10-part series. George Galloway, I want to bring you in here. You are talking to us from the British Isles. As you well know, you may be, or your country may represent, if not being the queen, certainly, if not the king, certainly the queen of colonization. Do you believe that your people today, your country, should somehow give some kind of repatriation, some kind of assistance to these countries that your descendants colonized?
Well, if this reparations business catches on, Rick, we'll be bankrupt, because Germany actually was only an African colonial power between its formation in about 1870 until its defeat in the First World War in 1918, while Britain was colonizing a third of the world for centuries. And I'm with the professor on this. I'm entirely cynical about these apologia that we are now being treated to. As the professor said, and I'll give you the number, 80% of Namibian land, now 30 years after our liberation, is still owned by Germans. 80% of an African country. If you begin to calibrate the looting of Africa carried out by the United Kingdom, by France, perhaps most brutally and licentiously by the Belgians, imagine. Little Belgium owned the Congo, killed 10 million African people in the Congo. And now, look, being brought up as a Catholic, Rick, we had a very bad attitude to Africa. We were told to give a penny for black babies. We were told that Africa was a basket case. Turns out Africa is a treasure trove, and now everyone wants a piece of it. But these former colonial powers are carrying the albatross around their neck of the great crimes that they committed in Africa in centuries gone by.
Wow, you gentlemen know this topic, and I thank you both for sharing your perspective on this. This is a really fascinating story. I think you can expect that we're going to be spending a whole lot more time looking into this, because I think it's one of the things that all citizens of the world should focus on. My thanks to you both. Thanks once again. This is the News with Rick Sanchez, and when we come back, is smoking on the rise globally? Really? RT's Trinity Chavez has that report. Stay right there. Hey, how are you? I got a story for you because it affects you. Yep. The story affects anybody on the planet who owns a phone, a laptop, or any other type of computer or tech equipment that is made by Apple or Microsoft. Those companies are not going to let you take that product to be fixed by anyone unless the person you take it to is their guy or their gal, their repair person. Of course, most communities are saying, wait a minute, you can't do that. But Apple, Microsoft, even Google are paying lawyers and lobbyists, a couple of bucks, so that they can say, yes, we can. Here now, News with Rick Sanchez, correspondent Faran Fronczak, looking at this story. I think most people out there at the very beginning, just at the outset of the story, hearing what we just said, are saying, that's not fair.
No, it's not. But the problem is, though, is just like with anything during the pandemic, Rick, a lot of things came to the forefront.
Yeah.
One of those things being for workplaces, you had your laptops, that were essential, kids at school where their computers were essential. What was happening is since they were so reliant on them, a lot of them started to, kind of break down.
Mm-hmm.
They would, for example, take them into Apple. Apple actually was closing many of the stores because of the pandemic. Therefore, the turnaround time a kid goes to turn in his laptop to get repaired, 6 to 8 weeks.
Oh, have you ever been to an Apple store?
I have it, and I have
it's
Apple products.
It's not a pleasant experience.
So says it a lot of people. But
yeah.
I mean, imagine being a kid where you need your iPad or your laptop, 6 to 8 weeks. That's going to take you out of probably bring you down to grade level. Who knows?
So what's their argument? I mean, that's fine. Listen, if I owned a business, if I made these pens. By the way, it's a cross pen. I mean, or a Mont Blanc. If I made this pen, I would want to make sure nobody's ever allowed to fix this pen but my people, because I want to make money on it. That's what I want. But that's not necessarily the way it should be. How are they even making this argument and not letting it be laughable?
One of the things that they're saying is that with these lithium type of batteries, that these are dangerous, that people can get hurt by doing this. And what the FTC is saying is people fix their car batteries, people jump their cars. Granted, it's, a liability probably, but they do it themselves.
A lot of things are dangerous.
Exactly, but one of the things that
Drive a forklift.
Exactly, I think you have to have a license for, but depending though, what these companies are also saying is we're making these great products, we don't understand why this is happening. You have one guy from iFixit who has a really great soundbite about how they're not doing that. Take a listen.
All right.
Phones are not getting markedly better every year. The difference between an iPhone 12 and an iPhone 11 is pretty small. Back in the day, the difference between like a 3 and a 4 was huge. So yeah, we're plateauing. It's time to start hanging on to these things longer. And the manufacturers are reacting to that by doing things like gluing in batteries, locking things down. You have an Apple AirPod. These things only last 18 months, 2 years, and then the batteries stop working. There's no way to swap them out. So yeah, the fix to all this is really straightforward. Just sell us the parts that we need. Give the repair shops the information they need to be able to make these things last longer. It's going to save everybody money. It'll help the planet, and long term, it's going to be good for these companies.
Now, one great thing is for Massachusetts, they actually put it on their 2020 presidential ballot. It did go through with 2.2 million people voting in favor of right to repair, 700 against it. However, these lobbyists are working. They've already struck it down in 27 states. The recent one was Nevada that they struck it down. So it's going to be interesting, but it affects all of us, like you said in the beginning.
Yeah, listen, it's a fascinating story, and I'm glad you picked that up for us. There's only about 5 billion people out there who care. She laughs, you laugh. So guess what? Just when we thought that the number of smokers out there was going down, because if you look around, you don't see as many people smoking as you used to, right? No, believe it or not, it's actually rising. There is new research out there that seems to suggest that smoking caused more than 8 million deaths last year. Up. So where is this happening? Is it in developed countries? No, it's in poorer countries where the rules and the regs that the rest of us have to follow, like you're not allowed to advertise to get people to smoke, those rules they don't exist in those places. And lo and behold, the smoking and tobacco companies, they know that. Here's Trinity Chavez picking up the story from here.
Today, the number of people who smoke increasing around the world. A study published in The Lancet shows the number of smokers worldwide has increased 1.1 billion in 2019, with tobacco causing nearly 8 million deaths, including 1 in 5 deaths in males worldwide. Poor countries being hit the hardest. According to the World Health Organization, it is the poorer and poorest who tend to smoke the most. In fact, 84% of smokers live in developing countries and transitional economy countries, while another study found that only 10% of women and 12% of men in the highest socioeconomic group are smokers. Meanwhile, 35% of women and 40% of men in lowest socioeconomical groups smoke. Industry experts say such a smoking increase in developing countries will lead them to bear the brunt of the tobacco epidemic in the 21st century. And if current smoking patterns continue, 7 of the world's 10 million annual deaths from tobacco will occur in developing countries. This while others believe that the tobacco industry's long history of developing cigarette brands and predatory marketing campaigns have deliberately targeted men and women and even kids, which has led to a devastating consequence on health. While most of us remember those cigarette ads from decades past with handsome businessmen and doctors endorsing smoking to pretty women looking sultry with cigarettes, in today's day and age, some of the same tactics are being used by social media influencers to advertise e-cigarettes. According to the CDC, in 2019, the largest cigarette and smokeless tobacco companies spent $8.2 billion on advertising and promotional expenses in the United States alone. And the 4 major U.S. cigarette companies spent $7.62 billion on cigarette advertising and promotion in 2019. Now, the Tobacco Control Act expands the ability of states and local governments to regulate tobacco product advertising, but the law also requires that the FDA has to create warnings for both cigarette use and smokeless tobacco. Still, though, activists are calling for an end to what they call predatory advertising targeting young kids and more comprehensive smoke-free laws. Reporting in New York, Trinity Chavez, RT.
That's fascinating, huh? As Americans, you know, we like to brag that we're the best country in the world, right? It's almost like if you get in trouble if you don't say that at least once a day, which is a little weird in and of itself. But mind you, there is a certain exceptionalism about America. There's no doubt about it. But there are also a couple of things about our country that we frankly need to fix, and quickly, because they make us exceptional, all right, exceptionally bad. And you know what one of those things is? You know what one of those categories is? Our prison system and our rate of incarceration. Here to explain this topic, host of Redacted Tonight, Lee Camp. So what is it about our prison system and our incarceration rate that makes us not so good?
Well, you were right. We are exceptional. We are the top in the world. We've got the top incarceration rate per 100,000 per capita, but we also have the most prisoners in general. We are the #1 prison state in the world. And so I had a little time on my hands, so I wrote up a plan to just get rid of all the prisoners. And I put it out on SheerPost and some other places. But basically,
I hear it's good, by the way.
If you look,
one of the reasons you're here is a bunch of folks on our staff read your article and said, we've got to get Lee Camp on. He just wrote this fascinating piece. So
you sent someone all the way across the hall. You found me.
to knock on your door.
So we have 2.3 million people in prison every year.
Right.
And I started looking at why they're in prison. So you have 470,000 that are not yet convicted. Okay, well, innocent until proven guilty, right? So
seriously?
They're free, yes, 470,000. You've already reduced like a fourth of our entire prison population. Then you have 328,000 drug offenders. Well, if they get arrested for something else like stealing or some kind of crime, then they should be arrested for that, not the drugs. Drugs is a health issue, not a crime issue.
Yeah.
And so you don't need to arrest them twice for drugs and for stealing. Arrest them for the stealing, don't arrest them for the drugs. So nonviolent drug offenders should be released. I mean, and then people go, well, they harm themselves. I'm like, isn't it our right to harm ourselves?
Yes.
That's half the reason I get up in the morning. Drink some whiskey, go play amateur rugby match. I love harming myself.
Just think of all the stupid stuff I do. Right. Go on. You're a comedian.
So they're all free. Now we've nearly let out half the prisoners already. Then you have 460,000 nonviolent property crimes, but like theft or fraud or something. But Wall Street is a Ponzi scheme that steals far more than any of those. It's a rounding error compared to Wall Street. Not to mention the cops now steal more than street theft by civil asset forfeiture. So the cops are actually stealing more than our street criminals.
Or the municipalities they're doing it for. Yeah.
Yeah. And so still, yes, I understand if someone comes in and steals your signed poster of the Jackass movie, then you want them to be punished. So let's give them community service or something awful like sponge bathing Kissinger or something. Something that'll make them not do it again. But they don't need to be in prison. So we
over-incarcerate.
Absolutely, in a massive way. A lot of it has to do with our drug war, which is a war on our own people. I mean, it was designed, Ehrlichman, an aide to Nixon, admitted in the 90s that it was designed to imprison black people and activists. That's why they created it.
Is it also about just money? you make a lot of money by putting people in prison, or some people do.
Some people do. There are lobbyists that are pushing for more imprisonment, but I'd say that's not the biggest cause of it. It does go on. There are private prisons that have a contract with the state to have a certain percentage in, but 90% full and stuff. But I don't think that's the main reason our prisons are.
But as I listen to your numbers, the number one that just jaw-dropping is people who smoked a marijuana cigarette and end up with 5 years in prison or something like that.
Right. It's insane. And in most countries, they don't do this. Some of the other reasons are like 44,000 juveniles in prison. In most countries, they wouldn't lock a juvenile up for very long. We're one of the only ones that does that.
So why do we do that?
Because we're over-incarcerating everybody. We act like it's the solution to everything. Much of our mainstream media, you and I have talked about this before, even when crime goes down, they're still covering it like it's worse than ever before.
Every night on local news, you see the murder du jour, right?
Yes, exactly. So everyone thinks just lock them up, and that's the answer. But of course, that destroys communities more, especially when people are locked up for nothing, like you're talking about, marijuana, cigarette, and it destroys the community.
And by the way, the great majority of the people locked up happen to be African American.
Yeah, well,
not that we noticed.
Percentage-wise, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Rick.
Good stuff. I'll read it now.
Yeah.
It's our news. Thanks for being with us. I'm Rick Sanchez. We'll be looking for you again when it's time to do news again.